So if determinism is true, then God can't be. Um, so just to clarify, I'm talking about the usual conception of God, and regardless of what some people comment on my videos sometimes when I do videos like this, it's quite a common set of characteristics of the Abrahamic God, which is the God that the vast majority of monotheists in the world today believe in. So omniscience is the key one here today, which is all knowing, and then you have omnipotence, which is all powerful. So there's nothing within or without, I should say, God's competence. There's nothing he can't do. God's also the fountain of justice, which will have implications, as we shall see as we carry on in this video too. So he's the fountain of justice. He's the source of goodness. All good. It's ultimately where that all that good stuff comes from. So you have all these different traits of the Abrahamic God: omniscience, omnipotence, omnibenevolence, as well as I've just described as well, all goodness. Omnipresent too, so omnipresent, so God is everywhere. God is within the universe, but also without it as well. But anyway, that's the conception, very common characteristics of God that I'm working with here, and it's not rocket science. That's usually the God we talk about when we talk about these issues. So if you've watched anything on this subject, determinism, so this is quite an interesting debate, and if you've watched anything on this subject, you'll know that there's quite a strong argument for the deterministic viewpoint. Cosmic skeptic, I think he's a good one. Famously, Sam Harris wrote a tiny book called Free Will, and he outlines why determinism is probably true. It's quite compelling, and if you accept the arguments that determinism is true, we don't have free will in the way that most people think that we have free will. Now, there are people out there called compatibilists who try and bring the two camps together. So, but for the purposes of this video, we're just going to stick with the whole premise that determinism is true, which it seems to be, unfortunately. So you probably guess what I'm going to do now. Again, it's not, you don't have to be the Albert Einstein of philosophy or just common sense to think about this. But the way I see it personally is that this kind of implies that if we have no free will, then how can we have any agency? Which has wider implications, of course, as well. So it also means, how can you talk about ethics? How can you talk about morality and all that kind of stuff? Because that implies agency too. It implies you have a choice. You have different outcomes that you can freely choose. You can choose to want something, and you can choose to believe and feel a certain way and then act. That's the whole point of agency. And yet determinism seems to imply the opposite, that everything's set and that there are only a certain amount of outcomes that we can take, and there are only certain ways that we can feel and want, and that we have no control over how we feel and want. And that doesn't gel well with this common conception of God, which I outlined a minute ago. And we can apply this to the whole issue itself. So when you if you're agnostic or atheistic, I'm more on the atheistic side, but I understand in the sense that Richard Dawkins outlines in The God Delusion, that everyone is an agnostic. It's just a gradation of on the scale of what you are. You can never be absolutely sure that God doesn't exist. But then let's apply the whole deterministic thing in terms of wants, and how we can't want something. We don't choose our wants. Well, then I can't particularly choose to want to believe in God. It's not like I can just snap my fingers and say, right, the chemistry in my brain suddenly changes, and now I've got a sincere and firm belief in a particular deity, whether that's a Christian God or Allah or Zoroaster's God or whatever. So whatever's your poison, I can't just randomly. There are journeys that we can point to, and we can see a stream of causal factors in different individuals that lead to their belief in God. But then you can't choose to want to believe in a God. You either do or you don't. And when you follow the deterministic logic, some people do and some people don't. In my case, I haven't seen any evidence personally. I haven't had any personal experiences. I haven't been on the road to Damascus or anything like that that's made me want to believe in any God. Which isn't to say I'm adverse to it. It's not like I'm determined not to believe in God or anything like that. It's just that I haven't had that experience, and the stars haven't aligned in that respect to make me want to believe in a God. It's pretty much out of my control, isn't it? And if you're in the same boat as me, it's out of your control as well. So none of it seems to make sense to me. So if that's true, if we don't choose our wants, and we don't choose to just suddenly feel compelled to listen to certain arguments or go down a certain pathway to a belief, whatever that belief is just take God out of it. But we're talking in the context of belief or non-belief in a deity. Well, there's people on different sides, and both of those people effectively haven't chosen to arrive at the point that they've arrived. So it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And usually in these religious systems, free will is implied as well. So you can choose to be good. You can choose to abide by God's law. You can choose to follow the 10 Commandments. You can choose not to do things that are against holy law. And if all that's true, if we don't choose to believe in the right God, and if we don't choose to follow his laws or its laws or whatever, then the idea of punishment and reward and all of the things that come with it, the hellfire and all of that kind of stuff, is just silly. It's daft. Because how can you be punished for something when you have no agency, you have no control over whether you chose that outcome in the first place? I think Sam Harris, you read that book, it's a very good book. And by the way, just to clarify something, I don't like the idea of not having free will. I'm like most people, intuitively, it comes across as bollocks. I like to think that I've got full control of my actions and full control of my beliefs and things like that. But when you really think about it, it's not true, is it? So you go, the people are formed. People are products of causal chains. And when you think about it, that's quite obvious, isn't it? So we're all products of genetics and environment and nurture, but then you go back ad infinitum, or back to the first cause, or an infinite chain of preceding causes that determined those factors that led to the state of being of what you are at the moment. So your belief in a God or your non-belief in a God. It's not something that's been freely chosen, is it? There is no effective free will. It's a causal chain of events. It gets a bit worse than that as well, if you think about it, because I've thought about this a little bit, and it's actually quite disturbing. Because if we assume, and by the way, it's not that I'm arguing for the non-existence of a God per se. I'm arguing for the non-existence of the God that's conceived in the Abrahamic terms. So the whole, it just implodes, so it doesn't make any sense, which I'll get to in a minute. But the whole, all of the omnis, the fountain of justice and goodness and all of that, it doesn't make any bloody sense. Because if we assume as well the whole, God created the universe, he's outside of the universe, he's separate from it, but he's all of that. If we assume all that as well, then we must assume that instead of an infinite regress of causes, that God, and this is a thing and it's a common argument for God's existence as well, if we assume that God is the prime cause, then you know where I'm going to go with that, don't you? That's quite disturbing, because that means that regardless of who you are, you could be the worst person ever. Like Hitler's a popular, like one of the most evil people, isn't he? So did all that crazy stuff, had all those crazy beliefs. But then if we accept the deterministic structure of the universe, which seems to be correct, there's not been super compelling arguments to knock it down. I hope there are, because I hope someone way smarter than me comes up with a decent argument for free will, or at least a compatibilist argument for free will, which means that I can go back to just comfortably believing that I've got full control over my wants and actions and things like that. But if we assume that God is the prime cause, and therefore is you have the stream, the trillions and trillions, probably quadrillions or like a Googleplex or something crazy like that. Trying to think of the biggest number ever or whatever. But you have this web of causes, but then ultimately they have to, given the nature of God, given the nature of the universe, if we accept that conception of God, they have to go back to that prime cause. And so God alone in that system is the one that has free will. And that means that even the most virtuous person has the same ultimate prime cause and motivation as the most evil person. And it also doesn't really, it all traces back to God, and therefore it doesn't make sense to talk of agency and morality. So, and given all of that, if you have no agency, if you have no free will, how can we talk about the whole fountain of justice thing, the source of goodness? Again, that doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? So, I suppose the crux of this whole video is you can't have it every way. You can't have all of your cake and eat it at the same time. It doesn't make any bloody sense, does it? You can't have all of these characteristics. This is just one aspect of it. I'm sure there's like hundreds of, like probably thousands of videos out there talking about different contradictions in terms of the Abrahamic God, where you're talking about all the omnis and then all of that jazz. But this is just one problem where it doesn't really make sense to talk of a just God, all just, and then a source of goodness and the ultimate good, let's say. And when you factor in the whole punishment things, you're punished for certain things that you do. If you're an evil person, you will be punished. And by the way, that intuitively, that sounds right to me. I think that's a good thing. If you do have free will, which we don't seem to have, and if you choose to want certain things like doing disgusting things like murdering people or hurting people, then yeah, you should be punished. But then it seems to be the case that we don't want these things. We don't choose to want these things, I beg your pardon. So how does it make, how is that just? You're punishing a puppet, basically, that can feel and perceive being punished forever as well in some systems. So the whole hell thing, you're either rewarded for eternity being with God in a heaven of sorts, or you're punished eternally in a hell or in some other way, rejection by God or whatever way you want to frame it. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And it doesn't help just to say, oh, well, God's God and that's it. What he says goes. That doesn't make any bloody sense because it's still wrong. Me and you, we can just see that it's bollocks. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, bit of a ramble, but yeah, that's what I'm talking about. If determinism is true, and it seems to be, and we don't really have any free will, then the God that most people have in their minds, the whole that you study at school and then you're brought up to believe in, all of the omnis and all that, just implodes. Doesn't make sense. But it's not like I'm sort of laying down the law saying it's more of an open forum for debate, and lots of people do comment, and a lot of people get their knickers in a twist, but it's funny to watch, and sometimes there's cool points and it's constructive criticism. Not perfect, so I do these videos a lot of the time just to see what people think and to give answers to my own questions about it. So there might even be an answer out there. You never know, maybe in the comments. But anyway, let me know what you think. A bit of a brain bender, this one. Can't reconcile the two. Is there a good argument for free will out there? Is determinism a load of bollocks, or are these people correct? Are the Sam Harrises of the world correct? And if so, what does that mean for the common conception of God that many people have? Anyway, just fairly quick one today, and I'll see you in the next one.